So, believe it or not, it's been about 90 days since Apple released their beloved M4 Mac Mini, and as somebody who uses their M4 iPad Pro as their main computer, I had a few questions as to how it's going to fit in my workflow. Could it handle some of my daily tasks? Can I have 30 to 40 to 50 Chrome tabs open with the baseline M4 model and still be able to get some work done? And these are all questions that I've been able to answer over this long period of time, so that's what we're going to talk about in this video, which is going to be my long-term review of the M4 Mac Mini, because yes, it's one of the best, if not the best bang for buck computer when it comes to performance and price ratio, but it's not all butterfly and rainbows. So without further ado, let's get into it. So now before we get started, I do want to mention that I am using the baseline M4 Mac Mini, meaning that I have 256 gigs of onboard storage, as well as 16 gigs of RAM, because I wanted to go with the baseline due to the fact that I think that the price to performance ratio is actually its number one, by far, best feature, because for $600 from Apple or even $550 to $500 from Amazon brand new, there's nothing else on the market that compares to it from a price to performance to user experience ratio. But to get into the actual performance of this beast and what I've been using it for and what it's been able to handle, again, my M4 iPad Pro is my workhorse machine. I use that for things like video editing, for my creative tasks, for planning videos, for making thumbnails and thumbnail creation. So most of the more intensive task work does go on my iPad Pro, so what I use the M4 Mac Mini for is kind of this like base station of everything else. So I use it for more minimal tasks like surfing in Safari and surfing in Chrome. I use it for Slacking, I use it for email. I use it to have multiple windows open when it comes to multitasking and research purposes. I use it for things like ChatGPT and AI generation. I use it for ideating in the Notes application. I use it for collaborating in real time with FaceTime and things like that. When it comes to those kind of less intensive tasks or those medium intensive tasks, it can definitely handle that with no issues whatsoever with the baseline model. Now, when it comes to kind of pushing it with those types of tasks, so before you get into the video editing and before you get into kind of the GPU intensive tasks, things like having 30 Chrome tabs open, or maybe you have 20 Chrome tabs open, a few tabs open in Safari, you have a video player going, you have a few Finder windows going, which is something that I do on a regular basis, then it starts to bog down just a tad. I've had two different instances in the 90 days where I have had to restart my M4 Mac Mini because it did slow down to the point where it was getting in the way of me getting my stuff done. Now, I was still able to do stuff while I was doing it, but for instance, I would type out a word and it would take maybe half a second for that word to be fully typed out, or I would move my mouse and the mouse would kind of drag behind where I was actually moving it. And this was when I was using a bunch of those applications all at once. So I would have 8 to 10 applications open with multiple iterations of those applications. So I was really pushing it when it came to these kind of medium intensity tasks. So that is one thing to note with the baseline version specifically. Maybe if you had the 24 gigs of RAM or you upgraded that spec a little bit more, it would be able to handle those tasks. But I use Clean My Mac X. This is not sponsored, but I do end up getting that warning on the top right that kind of shows me that I'm using most, if not all, of my RAM. And it does recommend me closing some tabs out, or does recommend me to close some applications from time to time. But again, only 2 times that I've had to restart it, and it wasn't even a forced restart, it was just I would go in and I would restart it from the normal menu, and then everything would kind of fix itself and everything would kind of come back together. But that is something to take into consideration with the baseline version, that you can push it to the point, especially if you use something like Chrome, where it does bog itself down a little bit. So from a performance standpoint, I would say that it handles like small to medium workloads exceptionally well. Once you get into that upper echelon of medium or high-end workloads for all these different applications and all of them working at once, especially if you're going with third-party applications that aren't fully optimized for M4. Yes, they are built for M4, but nothing's going to compare to running an all Apple suite of applications. Like maybe if you lived inside of iMessage and you lived inside of Safari and you lived in Numbers and Keynote and used all things Apple, then it would be able to handle a little bit more. But for a lot of people, that's not going to be the case. A lot of people do use Chrome, a lot of people use Microsoft Teams, people use things like Slack, people use things like Zoom to be able to communicate. So definitely keep that in mind when you are pushing it with those medium intensity tasks and you do have the baseline version. So I will recommend, if you are looking at the M4 Mac Mini and you do run a lot of those third-party applications and you're constantly in them, go with the 24 gigs of RAM if you do have the extra money to do so, because it will help you long-term in moving forward. And one last thing I will say when it comes to performance overall is that even though it did slow down a couple of times, and even though I am pushing it kind of a little bit higher on the medium spectrum of being able to use these types of tasks and applications, it still always stayed kind of cool to the touch. Like I never really turned on the fan. The fan maybe turned on a couple of times, but even then the fan wasn't like thrusting through. It wasn't like a airplane landing or an airplane taking off. It was still very, very quiet if it was even on. So again, I don't know if maybe it's being throttled down, because I'm sure that if we sped up the fans and we're able to throttle it up, then to be able to handle those tasks, it would just be a little bit louder and probably less energy efficient. But that is just a personal anecdote that I wanted to share from a cooling standpoint. So now let's talk about design and connectivity, because one of the biggest things about this is that the form factor and footprint especially did change up on the M4 Mac Mini. It now essentially looks like a mini Mac Studio, and it is a 5x5 box that is 2 inches in height, so this thing is very small and compact, to the point where some people, including myself, consider this almost a portable workstation, because if you do bring it in a bag with you, all you need is a power cable and an external monitor, and then boom, you have pretty much a desktop setup anywhere you go, whether it's at a WeWork or a coffee shop or whatever the case may be. So in my opinion, it is the most portable desktop solution that you can have. Again, I'll probably recommend getting a laptop if you know you're going to be moving around on a day-to-day basis. But on those off chances that maybe once a month or twice a month you do have to take it somewhere, it is very easy because A, it's very compact, B, it's very lightweight, you don't need a lot of peripherals, and lastly, it is pretty instant in terms of being able to start up from a powered down position. So as long as you can find a place where you can power in or maybe even bring an external battery, then you're able to use this on the go. And then like I said, I have the baseline version, so in terms of a port situation, we have 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports on the rear, as well as an HDMI port, as well as an Ethernet port if you do want to hardwire in your internet, and then on the front side you have 2 additional USB-C ports, which are USB 3 speeds, so not Thunderbolt 4 speeds, but still fast enough, and they mimic the same speeds that we have on the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max iPhones. And then you do have a headphone jack on the front, so that's always nice to see. I haven't actually used that a single time, but that's what you get from a port selection. Now, if you upgrade to the M4 Pro, which changes the price to performance ratio situation quite a bit, you do get Thunderbolt 5 ports at some point, but again, we're dealing with the baseline model, which Thunderbolt 4 ports are more than fast enough for my current use case. Now, I do wish that they kept at least one USB-A port, because I still have a few peripherals that use USB-A dongles for connectivity, like my Satechi keyboard for zero latency type of connectivity. But again, if you rely fully on Bluetooth and you rely fully on USB-C, then you're not going to have any issues whatsoever with that port selection. I recently did add a CalDigit dock to my desk setup just because I have a few extra peripherals, but again, you know exactly who you are and you know exactly what type of peripherals you have that require that certain amount of ports, so you basically have 5 total USB-C ports at your disposal that do video, audio, and data. Now let's talk a little bit about my experience with the device from a Mac OS and ecosystem type of standpoint. Of course, if you come from Mac OS, it's going to be very familiar. I'm running Mac OS Sequoia, the latest version, which I believe 15.3 recently released. And, you know, it works across all of your devices very well. The way that I've been using it with my iPad Pro, I pretty much use them very separately, to be totally honest. Like I said, I use my M4 Mac Mini for communication stuff like email and being able to manage multiple windows and things like Slack, and every now and then I'll take a video meeting on there, and I'll tell you how because there's no webcam. And then I use my iPad Pro for the video creating, for the video editing, for the thumbnail creation, for uploading to YouTube and things like that. But I do use universal control every now and then. I do kind of move files back and forth whenever I need to. It is nice that I can pull my iPad Pro and use it as an additional secondary screen, which is nice to see. So being able to have that from the M4 Mac Mini perspective is a great thing. And then another thing about the M4 Mac Mini is that it now has support for up to 3 external monitors if you are in a situation where you do want to have that many monitors as external monitors. And then to go back to that ecosystem moment, the way that I actually take video calls is using my iPhone and using continuity camera, because again, the M4 Mac Mini of course is a desktop computer, it doesn't have a built-in webcam anywhere, and I didn't want to go out and buy a new webcam, so I just use continuity camera. And literally, I want to say 99.9% of the time, I'm not going to say 100% because maybe every now and then it'll break down, but for me, I haven't had a single issue with continuity camera. And I've taken probably over 100 calls in that 90-day span via continuity camera with my iPhone. Sometimes I connect it, and sometimes I just rely on Wi-Fi and wireless connectivity, and it works absolutely great. So for the most part, this sounds amazing. Everything seems to be working fine. It seems to have found its situational scenarios for me and my workflow. So where are the limitations? Where does it bog down? Like I mentioned, the number one that I've dealt with personally was having a ton of applications running simultaneously and running for a long time. And again, if you open up a ton of Chrome tabs and you have a lot of stuff happening in the background, because we only have 16 gigs of RAM, and I am glad that at least it's 16 gigs of RAM base, it's going to slow itself down. So you're gonna have to close out a couple of applications. And then secondly, the 256 gigs of onboard storage, at one point I got close to filling it up, which also slowed everything down, but then I just cleared everything out and everything went right back to normal. So you know who you are if you need as much onboard storage as you need, if you need 512 or 1 terabyte and things like that. But that is kind of the medium level task that really kind of got bogged down. And then secondly, again, I don't video edit on the M4 Mac Mini, but my colleague Jeff Benjamin does. He also has the baseline M4 Mac Mini, and he was telling me that if you do add a lot of 4K footage, if you use log footage, if you use footage that isn't optimized from your iPhone and put over to the M4 Mac Mini, if you have a lot of layers, it will slow down. It will definitely slow down a little bit. It might get a little bit choppy. Maybe Final Cut Pro won't play nice with you. If you keep it simple, if you use Final Cut Pro with a couple layers, if you use something like iMovie and you're not going crazy with it with transitions and overlay titles and layering things over one another and using keystones and stuff like that. It'll definitely work to get a simple video out and export it in a pretty fast time, I might add. But again, if you're doing something a lot more intensive, you know who you are, and you should probably go for an M4 Pro, or even something like a Mac Studio, or wait for the M4 Ultra or M4 Max to come out, or maybe get a MacBook Pro. But if you are just doing some light video editing, some light thumbnail creation, some light Photoshop stuff, it's gonna work totally fine for your use cases, as long as you know how much you're gonna be using it for. So my final verdict overall is still relatively overwhelmingly positive, right? I think the best feature of the M4 Mac Mini is a price to performance ratio because at a minimum on Amazon it's $550 or even $499 at its lowest point, and I think that's an absolute no-brainer, especially if you already have the peripherals that you need. A lot of people already have a keyboard and a mouse laying around, some people have some sort of monitor laying around, so for $500 to get a powerful machine like this that supports everything that I mentioned as well as support for Apple Intelligence, even though I don't use it too often, if at all, it's still great as a solution from a price to performance ratio. There is nothing on the market that's that small, that power efficient, that power intensive, and can handle what it can handle at that price point. At least there isn't anything yet, and if you want to prove me wrong, leave some links down below if something that comes turnkey and out of the box can be used. So for $500 to $600, there's nothing else like it on the market. It's also a relatively pretty device to look at. It works with a lot of peripherals, it works with your Apple ecosystem, it is kind of portable in certain situations if you can make it happen and make it portable for yourself. So overall, for the price, the M4 Mac Mini, I think, is Apple's best product of 2024, and leave a comment down below what you think. So that'll do it for this video, everybody. As you saw, the M4 Mac Mini is an awesome computer. It won't ever replace my iPad Pro because I just love using the iPad Pro more. It's better for me overall from a productivity standpoint. It looks better, it's more versatile for me, but there is a place for the M4 Mac Mini to live. It is my main base station when it comes to communicating. You can see that I use it as a desk setup computer and I use it every single day. It's a different tool in my toolbox that I use to get my stuff done, but like I said, that'll do it, everybody. If you did make it to the end of this video, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below. I will link down the best prices for the M4 Mac Mini. Like I said, as I said, it's always cheaper on Amazon, especially here in the US. I don't know how Amazon gets away with it, but it's brand new and it's still a fully sealed Apple product. Versus on Apple's website, you can get it for $600, and I believe you can get it for $549 through the Education Store, or maybe even $499. Let me know in the comment down below if you guys see that one. But if you want to watch more videos like this one, definitely check out one of these videos right here, and let me know if you have a Mac Mini. Do you use it? Do you have the M4 version? What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? I'm always down to communicate down in the comments below. But that'll do it, everybody, and until next time, peace. M4 Mac Mini for the win.